How did I end up here? Lying in your arms, watching city lights and the stars.
The meaning of subjective is something that is based on or influenced by personal feelings, tastes, or opinions. There are a lot of things that are subjective in this world. What weather is the best? It's overcast. What ice cream flavour is the best? It's salted caramel. Or even whether the chicken or the egg came first. It's the chicken. Come on now. Otherwise, how would the egg get there in the first place? Life can't be created if there is no life to create it. Think, Mark! Think! That meme's way past dead by now. There are plenty of subjective things out there, but one that I didn't touch on is what we're here to talk about today. Music. Music has a presence in everybody's life in some way or form, whether you're an avid listener or someone who just doesn't like music. It's there and always will be, something to inform for you people who fall into the latter, and if so, what's wrong with you? I'll admit, I haven't always been someone who listens or listened to music in his free time. Or at least, I wasn't until I took up making YouTube videos as a hobby. Hey, look, you need something playing in your ears while you work with tedious editing programs that are only tedious because of your system specs. However, I'm not about to go on a whole spiel about mainstream music and which artist stands out from one another. But since you asked, I think, okay, I'm not going to do that, don't worry. See, what I'm actually here to do is talk about video game music. Yeah, who would have guessed, right? Not like the title of the video says it or anything, or that my whole channel is primarily based around talking about video game related stuff. Nah, not at all. Enough joking around, video game music is a subject that's near and dear to my heart, more than you would think actually. It's not something I often talk about, although I have sprinkled in mentions of such in various recent videos. I even did a top 10 about my favourite pieces of video game music back in 2019. So it is something I am passionate about, as you would have guessed, seeing as I am here talking about it. Now, I'm not all that musically educated. I believe I've mentioned it before, so if you're expecting me to talk about subjects like music theory and specific intricacies of video game music pieces, then I'm sorry, I just can't do that. However, there are plenty of other creators out there who can do just that, so if you're interested, go check them out. But even so, I don't feel as though you have to be educated, in this case, to talk about stuff. That's essentially gatekeeping. If you think that, honestly. So using what I do know, and just my personal feelings, I'm going to be talking about a lot of video game music here today. There will be timestamps in the description below per the norm for these types of videos, so if there's a particular subject you want to hear me talk about, the exact time I start doing so will be there. And regarding what I will be talking about exactly about video game music, I'll be going on about how music can make a game, how some pieces induce anxiety in me, music that is catchy, various iconic OSTs throughout gaming history, various specific iconic pieces, and finally my personal favourite pieces of video game music. As mentioned, if any of those in particular interest you, feel free to check the description for a specific timestamp. This is probably my longest introduction to a video yet, surprisingly, so let's not dawdle any longer and let's get to talking about video game music. Strap in, this is likely going to be a long one. When playing video games, there are a lot of things that are important. Gameplay for one, but that's obvious. The gameplay loop, by extension, how it controls, the story, and the visual style, though to a lesser extent in my opinion. One thing I didn't mention there is, of course, the music. See, I feel like music is an often overlooked aspect of video games. Okay, well, not exactly, but let me explain. You always hear people commending the gameplay or visual style of a game, and you know, that's perfectly fine. They're absolutely valid things to commend and talk about. But when you look at an aspect like music, you start to notice that there's less talk in comparison. Admittedly, I'm guilty of this too. Okay, so this might sound really stupid, but oftentimes when I'm playing through a game for the first time, I'm not usually paying attention to the music, as I'm obviously concentrating on what's going on, and I only really acknowledge the music on a second playthrough, or if I have more to do after the game is finished. I know, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's kind of how it was for me for a while. Less so nowadays, thankfully, but yeah, it was just a thing that would happen. And it's things like this that really undermine the importance of music in video games. Obviously, music is important in any form of visual media, movies, TV shows, what have you, but I'm not talking about those here. I'm going to use some examples here to really demonstrate my point. So think about this. Do you remember the moment in Pokemon Black and White where Bianca's father confronts her about halting her journey and coming home because he's scared for her? Well, during that scene, the piece, Unwavering Emotions, plays. It's a beautiful piece that conveys a lot of, well, emotion, and really adds to the scene that's playing out before you. Now, imagine that scene again, but instead, the Master City theme just continues to play. what's going on the screen is still emotional, a lot is taken from it when you remove that particular piece of music, and it just isn't as potent or even as memorable. Now to something of a much different tonal style, Xenoblade Chronicles. Real quick, there are going to be endgame spoilers for the original Xenoblade Chronicles /DE here, so if you want to avoid them, of which I suggest doing so if you've never played or even seen this game's story before, then here's a timestamp for you to do so. Are we ready? Okay, so in the final boss battle of Xenoblade Chronicles, you're facing off against Xanza. It's the universe's god, pretty much. So you can imagine that a premise such as that, fighting God, is going to have some kind of epic and intense music track behind it, and boy are you right! The track that plays it is called Xanza the Divine, and it is fitting for such a character and fight. However, when you subtract this piece from the fight, that's where it quickly falls apart in my opinion. Okay, sure, I purposely picked the worst option that I could there, but again, it was just to demonstrate a point here. While the past couple of examples have been moments rather than full games themselves, you'd have to understand me here when I say that we'd be here all day talking about Pokemon Black and White and Xenoblade Chronicles for each time a piece of music made a moment, so you know. But let me make this clear, neither of these games would be what they are to me without their amazing soundtracks. Rather than specific examples, how about full games themselves? First example here, Doom Eternal. Really, I could have picked any Doom game here, but I chose Eternal because it's the one I've been playing through recently. I'm a simple guy. If there's one thing the Doom series is known for, you know, other than ripping and tearing your way through demonic hordes of enemies, it's its music, and Doom Eternal is absolutely no exception. Its entire soundtrack is something you can easily rock out to. It keeps your blood pumping, as such a soundtrack should, and it's something that makes you feel like you're the Doomslayer. If a piece of music, or even an entire OST can make you feel like that, like the one you're playing as, you know for sure that it's a damn good one. That's not me saying that Doom Eternal or any Doom game would fall apart without its intense soundtrack, not at all. It would just be less than what it is, you know. Just like how we established previously with specific moments. Second example here, this is another game that's pretty synonymous for its soundtrack, and rightly so. Undertale.
Oh my god! Okay, it's happening! Everybody stay calm! What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure? Stay calm! Wait! Everybody calm down!
Sound the alarms, boys, he's doing it. He's finally talking about Undertale. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Undertale's soundtrack is pretty iconic nowadays. I mean, I'm sure you've heard Megalovania at least once or twice, seeing as how it was a meme for a good while, but would you be surprised if I told you that Undertale has more tracks than just Megalovania? I know, crazy right? A lot of times when people are talking about Undertale in high regards, if it's not for the engaging character writing and or story that really struck a chord with a lot of people with its meta commentary on games, outcomes being entirely at players' mercy, it's the music. This might be a bold statement on my part, but I don't think Undertale would be in its current position of popularity without its soundtrack. I mean, just look at Megalovania again. I'm sure a lot of people became familiar with Undertale because of it. And sure, that may be because it wasn't made for a while, as previously mentioned, but putting that status aside for a second, Megalovania is a legitimately good piece. Before I dig myself a hole any farther than I already have, I want to put this idea in your head. Without the soundtrack we've all come to know and love, even for those who have never played Undertale, even to this day, so me, until I started writing this, what would Undertale be? It's quite hard to imagine, huh? That's because we can't separate the two. They're not intertwined with each other for eternity. In a good way. We can't not associate the soundtrack with anything but Undertale, and that to me is the mark of an iconic OST. One that makes a game what it is. Ah, see? Tied it all nicely in the end there. Well, not quite, because there's one last bit to this I want to talk about and how music can make a game. That's regarding a few series that have never had an issue with music, despite their series sometimes differing in game quality. It's yet another example of how video game music can sometimes be undermined in favour of other aspects. Maybe you can guess which series I'm alluding to, but to be specific, I mean the Sonic series, the Pokemon series, and the Fire Emblem series. One of those series I have not played any games of despite wanting to in some capacity. Well, unless you count Fire Emblem Heroes as part of the series, but from the discourse I've seen, I don't think people do. But anyway, these three series in particular are ones that I and a lot of people have strong opinions on, one way or another, but also agree that the music is the most outstanding aspect. The Sonic series is a prime example of this. Needless to say, Sonic's games have never been consistent in quality, flip-flopping between good, bad, or even just okay with every release. But take Sonic 06 for example. Quite a divisive game in the sense that no one's sure if it's actually a real game or not, but nevertheless, 06 generally has some really good pieces such as His World and All Hell Shadow. And yes, I do actually think they're good. I'm not just saying them for the sake of it. Or how about Team Sonic Racing? I mean, hey, you're getting a free game along with an amazing soundtrack. What a bonus! On to Pokemon now. It's definitely hard to argue that any of the main series games, or even spin-off games, are outright bad. I can't argue for Sword and Shield being bad, but I can sure argue in favour of Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire being bad. And you know where I'm going with this, but despite how I feel about Auras, I will say it has an amazing OST. If you're wondering, my personal favourite pieces from the soundtrack include the Gym Leader battle theme, A Road Once Travelled, the Team Aqua and Team Aqua Leader battle theme, Soaring Dreams, the Primal Legendary theme, Wally's battle theme, the Elite Four battle theme, Champion Stevens theme, and Zinnia's battle theme. Sorry if I went a little overboard, I'm just trying to get my point across. As for the Fire Emblem series, I'm not qualified to talk about this one. As I said, I have yet to play any actual Fire Emblem game, and, well, I don't think Fire Emblem music is that good from what I've heard in Smash Bros and such, I'm sorry. But hey, if you think it's good, then good for you. I'm genuinely glad that you can like it. It's just not for me. All I wanted to do was bring it up here because the reception regarding the subject was a perfect fit. But I also don't want to talk about Fire Emblem, so... Okay, so this particular segment has no real meaningful purpose here in this video. I just thought it would be fun to include, honestly. There are many different types of emotions and or feelings that video game music can evoke in us. Excitement, sadness, fear, you name it. But the one we're going to be talking about in this segment, just as the title suggests, is anxiety. Music evoking a feeling of unease or nervousness in us is way worse than music evoking fear, in my opinion. A side effect of anxiety is panic. And while that's also a side effect of fear, and now that I think about it, fear and anxiety are kind of one and the same, so I don't know why I'm trying to differentiate them here. At any rate, let's just get to talking about music that I feel evokes this feeling, because I'm somehow still bad at segues. You've heard it playing in the background already, but Tetris 99's Phase 3 music. Now, me, I suck at Tetris, so I've never had the liberty of getting to actually hear this track in game. But at the same time, I'm kind of glad I haven't, because I know for sure I'd fold immediately if this piece kicked in. I mean, just listen to it. Did you ever expect Tetris to be this intense? Hearing this piece go on for a few minutes in the heat of things is going to make you want to play Tetris Effect just to ease your nerves, which I guess that's a good marketing strategy, never mind. Now for another Battle Royale title, of something you never imagined could be one, Pac-Man 99. And I am, of course, talking about the piece that plays when you make it to the top 10. I'm pretty good at Pac-Man, I'd like to think, but I have yet to hear this in-game again. But also yet again, I don't think I'd want to. It's truly amazing how it's possible to make something like Tetris or Pac-Man intense. But hey, at least it slaps. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, you're probably wondering why this game is here, seeing as how you're mostly listening to ambience throughout your playthrough, or a light piano track here and there. But if that's the case, you've somehow never encountered the Guardian.
It's a lovely day to walk down the road, and if I ever stop singing, I will.
Huh? Oh, crap.
So, yeah, hearing the Guardian counter music kick in while you're just nonchalantly wandering the vast fields of Hyrule is quite the scare. It's just such a sudden and somewhat intense contrast to what you're usually listening to. On to another Zelda game, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Majora's Mask's soundtrack is comparatively somber to other Zelda games. It has a lot of pieces that invoke a sense of unease and dread, obviously not all housed by the impending apocalypse staring you down at all times. There are plenty of pieces I can mention here, but the one I've chosen to focus on in particular here that I feel invokes the largest sense of anxiety is simply known as Final Hours. It's beautiful, it's somber, it's unsettling, appropriately so. You saw it coming one way or another. Come on now. My channel's legacy rests solely upon this piece, but that's not what we're here talking about. But instead, how it's just such a great piece that really keeps you on the edge of your seat right from the get-go. When those first few chords hit, you know it's business, and you better be ready. Even to this day, every time I play through Platinum and get to Cynthia, I always suddenly lose my otherwise calm composure with her when her music kicks in. It's just, oh, it's so good. Sticking with Pokemon, almost every Pokemon game has some sort of unsettling location, and from the Generation 4 games, that's the old Chateau in Eternal Forest. This place is just, I get shivers just thinking about it. You have to go here to encounter Rotom, which you'll need to do to complete your regional decks, so it's unavoidable, and I always dread revisiting it. And now for Total Whiplash! Splatoon has a pretty good soundtrack, wouldn't you say? Maybe you don't agree with me, which would be fine. I understand that its music requires a certain taste. But if there's one thing we can hopefully agree on, it's that now or never, the piece that plays in the final minute of a match both gets your blood pumping, but also makes you a little anxious in the heat of things. Finally, for another bit of Total Whiplash, the original Five Nights at Freddy's. And I'm sure you already know what I mean. But if you don't, the piece that plays before Freddy jump scares you when you run out of power. It's really good because you don't know if it will play for long enough for you to survive the night when you're right near the end, or if it will be cut short. It's such a good situational piece that really gets you panicking. I'm sure we've had some piece of music that plays over and over again in our heads at some point in our lives, right? Well, that's the mark of a good piece of music. If you can't get it out of your head, then it's obviously resonating with you in some way, right? And, as you would guess by this point, I hope, this could also be the case with video games. Alright, sure, maybe not all the music that gets stuck in your head is good, but where do I go from here exactly? Whether it's something well known like the Super Mario Bros. Theme, or something a little more niche like insert what you would consider niche here, it's most likely happened to you at some point if you are ingrained in gaming culture like I am. And to the unfortunately inevitable detriment to some, and myself, I will be talking about a few of the more catchy pieces in gaming here, so yeah, I apologise in advance if any of them get stuck in your head. Without further ado, we're starting off with what I've already mentioned, the Super Mario Bros. Theme, or its overall theme to be exact. This one's a classic, receiving many remixes over the years but always maintaining that familiar melody that makes it so catchy. Catchy music is, well, catchy most oftentimes because of its simplicity. And the Super Mario Bros. Theme is simple, charmingly so, which makes it both iconic and catchy. When you think about it, you think of this piece, and then you can't get it out of your head for the next few hours, days, or even weeks because it's just that good. Next up, another piece of Mario music, the Starman theme. This piece plays wherever you pick up a star power-up in the main series games and a number of the spin-offs, and it is way more catchy in my opinion, mostly thanks to how simple its melody is, being a lot simpler than the main Mario theme in comparison. Look at me going on about music complexity, I don't know crap. But anyway, I personally really love this piece, especially the remix piece that plays in Super Paper Mario when you pick up the Megastar. The Zelda theme. Much like the Super Mario Bros. Theme, pretty much everyone is or should be familiar with this iconic piece. It's truly such a classic, and it's unfortunate I can't say too much about it. Not because there isn't a lot to say, but because I'm bad with words, we've established this, moving on. Now this next one, has haunted me for years ever since I first heard it. I don't mean it scared me, it just won't leave me alone, and it's the Bubble Bobble theme. Don't get me wrong, I actually do really love this piece. I think it's fun, it's very upbeat, and it makes you feel good, but damn, is it one hell of a catchy piece, so I guess I could be worse off with video game music getting stuck in my head for years on end. And finally, this one needs no introduction. For as much as for me Megalovania was and maybe still is, I unironically think it's a genuinely good piece, like the rest of the OST, but what makes it that much better is, well, it's super catchy. Now, the catchy aspect of it might be in part because of how much it made the rounds, spawning countless memes and remixes, but it's hard to dispute that because of how we don't know if the opposite case would have become a reality or not, but seeing as how Undertale had reached unprecedented popularity before the memes, I think it's just safe to say that Megalovania has always been an earworm piece. With our little anxiety trip and earworms now behind us, it's time to talk about the video game OSTs that have gone down in history as being iconic. I'm sure that when I bring up the notion about talking about iconic OSTs, you've already thought of a few. In fact, I've already mentioned a few of those games that I'll be talking about here already, and while one or two here you may argue with, personally, even if they don't come up in the conversation of iconic a lot, or if at all, I think they deserve to be classified as such. To begin with, we've got Super Mario 64. You know the soundtrack well, I know it well, pretty much everyone does. From Bob on Battlefield to Jolly Roger Bay, from Cool Cool Mountain to Rainbow Ride, to even the Princess's Secret Slide, Super Mario 64 has so many memorable and beloved music tracks in gaming. I will admit, while 64's soundtrack is not one of my personal favourites in video games, or even in the Mario series itself, I can certainly see why it's so iconic because these pieces are genuinely really great. The soundtrack is a favourite of many, and that's easy to see with the number of amazing remixes these tracks still receive to this day, 25 years after the game's initial release. I mentioned just that 64's OST was my favourite in the Mario series. That's because Super Mario Galaxy is, and I'm serious about that. Super Mario Galaxy was the first Mario game to feature orchestrated music for Mario's first foray into the great beyond, and they had to go big, and go big they did because this soundtrack is a pure delight. It hits you right from the get-go with a title screen and doesn't cease to amaze throughout. Some of the most notable pieces, which is really saying something, are Overture, Lunar, To the Gateway, Space Junk Galaxy, Gusty Garland Galaxy, because duh, Toy Time Galaxy, Sad Story, which generally makes me well out of people to this day, and Final Bowser Battle. And those are just a few, believe it or not. It's truly a wonderful OST, and if you haven't heard any of it, it's well worth your time to give it a few pieces to listen. If you're wondering why I've made no mention of Super Mario Sunshine and just skipped right to Galaxy, well, at the time of the script, I haven't played Sunshine, despite owning it on the GameCube, and as part of one of the rarest games now in existence, thanks to Nintendo. On to something a little more retro now, Tetris. You know the Tetris theme? I know it, literally everyone does. I don't need to go in depth with this one, it's iconic for a reason. Moving on now to Final Fantasy VII. To an extent, I believe you could argue that many of the FF OSTs are iconic, but when it comes to the largest recognition in terms of the game itself and the OST, it's hard to argue that FF7 doesn't have every other one beat. It's the one with Mimic and two characters in Smash Bros. After all. You think of FF7's soundtrack, and what's the first pieces that come to mind? I mean, assuming you even know what a Final Fantasy VII is anyway, but you live under a rock for the past 2 decades plus aside, some of the tracks that make up 7's iconic OST include the main theme of the game, Prelude, Fight On, the primary battle theme, Flowers Blooming in the Church, On That Day 5 years ago, Genova, and, of course, One Winged Angel, again, just to name a few. Out of all of these, One Winged Angel is obviously the one that comes up most in conversation regarding 7's OST, but that's not to undermine any of the other spectacular pieces 7 has to offer. It's all fantastic, and one of the many reasons FF7 is so beloved, even to this day, and exactly why its soundtrack is so iconic. I have no clever way of segueing back into this one, what to do. So Undertale. We've already talked about it, sure, but we never really spoke in depth about its OST and what makes up its OST. Well, sort of, but never mind that. You know I'm Megalovania already, but how about other pieces? I'm gonna be here a while, by the way. Such as Spider Dance, Once Upon a Time, Your Best Friend, Hurrah, So Temperate, Home, Sans, yeah, that's actually just what it's called. Yeah, Shop, Bone Trussle, Dummy, Temmie Village, Spear of Justice, It's Showtime, Confession, Spider Dance, okay look, it's a goddamn amazing soundtrack, like for real. Take my word on this one, it deserves to be iconic. Wait, did I mention Spider Dance twice? All composed by one guy as well, Toby Fox himself. He's self-taught too, you know, this man's something else. I've genuinely just realised while writing this that the next segment is going to seem somewhat redundant in a sense if I continue to name off specific examples from each OST I'm going to be mentioning. Whatever. Mega Man, the megaest of mans. Good lord, my writing's gone out the window. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this series, whether it be for the main series of Mega Man 1 through 11, the X series, the Battle Network series, or even Mega Man Legends. Most are familiar with this iconic blue bomber in some way or form. I mean, he wouldn't be iconic if people didn't. He's in Smash Bros for a reason. Now, I could cheat and say the entire series as a whole is iconic with its music, but we'd be here all day as if we aren't already going to be. So, I've chosen Mega Man 2 to talk about here because it's regarded as the best one of the main series, and there's obviously a lot of reason for that. Its soundtrack is one of them. Because, hey, if your game is going to be harder than me when I'm listening to Deathmatch with Torna from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, okay, 1, we'll get back to that later, and 2, I'm so sorry, then you gotta have great music to accompany the inevitable frustration. Being real, for an NES game, a Mega Man 2 soundtrack is fantastic. Nothing against the NES, of course, but you know, sound technology was pretty limited in terms of compositions and capability back then. So yeah, but that aside, some of the standout tracks include the opening theme, Woodman Stage, Airman Stage, and Wily's Fortress 1. Moving on from a classic, let's talk about something a little more modern, and is surely destined to be a classic in time, Persona 5. Full disclosure, I've never played Persona 5, because I don't own a PS4, and to hell with Sony if I'm ever getting a hold of a PS5 for the next decade. But, brief rant aside, I like the Fire Emblem series. I think Persona 5 has phenomenal music, but you haven't heard that one before. That tastes as cold as an iceberg. It's like saying Xenoblade is the best series known to man. It's like, yeah, we know. Back to the subject at hand. So yeah, Persona 5 has an excellent soundtrack. That's pretty common knowledge at this point, given how the game was making its rounds into conversations on the internet for a while, and still to some extent. Both the game and the soundtrack has so much style to them that's like a style overload. After all, it has a stylistic elements of jazz incorporated into a lot of its music, and as a fan of jazz, you already know I vibe with it. But anyway, in regards to its soundtrack, there are a lot of pieces I could highlight, and I could also just make note of the soundtrack as a whole, but yeah, that's what I'm going to do, just the OST as a whole is a highlight here. It's really worth your time to go look up the OST on YouTube or wherever, because yeah, it's really just that good as a whole, I'm serious. Metal Gear, arguably the definitive tactical espionage series experience in gaming. For a series where your primary objective is to sneak around, okay, well, not exactly, shit gets complicated in the Solid series, you might expect more subdued, maybe atmospheric tracks, but a lot of the music featured can be kind of intense and or weirdly high energy. For reference, I'm talking about the original Metal Gear Solid here, so in other words, before things in that series went a lot insane in terms of story. Nevertheless, take the main theme of the game, for example. It's epic, it's intense, it really gets you excited for what's to come. And there are other pieces too, such as Encounter, Mantis Hymn, Duel, Blast Furnace, and Escape. Solid's soundtrack is kind of underrated despite being iconic, I feel, because I rarely see it talked about unless Metal Gear itself is in the focus of the conversation. Bit of tonal whiplash in terms of the genre here, but we're talking about Silent Hill next. I already went on a spiel about wanting Konami to get their heads out of their asses already in my Art Video Game cover art video, so I won't subject you to that once more here, now that we're talking about Silent Hill again. But anyway, compared to the OSTs we've covered so far, Silent Hills is, well, just as you would expect, unsettling to the nth degree, and as it should be because, well, Silent Hill is a horror game in case you didn't know. Much like with Persona 5, there are not any particular piece I want to specifically mention here, but rather that the entire ST is worth your time, as weird as it is to say for a horror game soundtrack. Yay! Tonal whiplash again, yet again as we switch to Minecraft. You've heard a piece or two from Minecraft's soundtrack over the years, I can somewhat guarantee that, even if you weren't aware it was from Minecraft itself, which is a feeling I had with Undertale actually, but we're talking about Minecraft here, not Undertale again. I'm pretty sure I've already mentioned how good Minecraft's quiet, almost kind of somber soundtrack is in my review of the game back in 2019, but in case I didn't, it's truly wonderful. Its soundtrack is full of nostalgia for a lot of people, which, yes, that's an aspect of about something that can only be achieved over time, but Minecraft's achieved it, and then some, so there you go. Yeah, again, it's another one of those soundtracks where it's all worth your time in my opinion. Maybe you don't share the same nostalgia for Minecraft that a lot of people do, but even without that, I'm sure you can agree that a lot of pieces really resonate with you, as good music should do, no matter how simple. So when doing research into some of the most iconic soundtracks in gaming, Banjo-Kazooie's was not one that I saw talked about often, if at all, but yet, it resonates with me as being iconic for some reason. This is odd for me, honestly, because I never grew up with Banjo-Kazooie. It was before my time, in fact, and, well, it was only in the last few years that I played through the game for the first time, so a lot of its music is great, and I see a lot of pieces come up a lot in conversation regarding favourite pieces of gaming music. It's a very roundabout way of me wanting to highlight a few of the tracks, but regardless, tracks such as Spiral Mountain, the pause screen music of all things, Gruntilda's Lair, Mambo's Mountain, Treasure Trove Cove, the Wonder Wing theme, and Freeze Easy Peak, all part in why the soundtrack should be considered iconic. Who knows though, maybe it is already and somehow just blind to it. Doom, the original one, released in 1923 to be exact, was home to one of the most rocking soundtracks in video games at the time, don't quote me on that. In fact, its use of heavy metal music inspired a genre of metal called doom metal. That's just how iconic the soundtrack is. Okay, well, the part about inspiring the genre of doom metal is not actually true, because the origins of doom metal date back to the 1970s, but moving on. So yeah, Doom's got a pretty hardcore soundtrack, that's common knowledge at this point, with such pieces making up the OST, including At Doom's Gate, Dark Halls, Suspense, I Sought the Demons, and Deep Into the Code. Approaching 18 years since its release, its soundtrack is still pretty hardcore, even despite the simpler technology back then. From a Demon Slayer to an orange marsupial, Crash Bandicoot is one of the PlayStation's most iconic mascots. He may not be exclusive to PlayStation consoles anymore, but that doesn't disregard the fact that his original 3 games are pretty iconic. You already know my way of transitioning is at this point, so skipping right to it, Crash 1's soundtrack is pretty great. It's full of catchy melodies and what I like to say is a tropical vibe. Or maybe that's just me. So many pieces hold up fantastically to this day. And, well, now we have the Insane trilogy, a remastering of the first 3 games. It's hard to ignore the fact that this soundtrack is beloved by many. The main theme is most likely what comes to mind first, but other great pieces include Whole Hog, Sunset Vista, Fumbling in the Dark, and Dr. Neo Cortex. Only 2 more to go now, and it's Ocarina of Time that's getting the focus. About time, wouldn't you say? The original 3D Zelda, the one that started it all for 3D Zelda. Yeah. While the quality of the game itself gets argued a lot nowadays, having some outdated aspects about it, thanks to, in hindsight, never does the quality of the OST. If it weren't for Hyrule Warriors, then no, Ocarina of Time still wouldn't be my favourite Zelda soundtrack. That would probably be even Majora's Mask Skyward Sword, but it's still largely solid. All things considered, I've never played Ocarina of Time, but as I've established a few times by now already, you don't need to have played the game to appreciate its OST. Which brings us to the set pieces that make up its iconic OST. Whether it's that piece that accompanies that iconic title screen of Link riding upon his horse, or the quaint little piece that plays when you're in a house, the somewhat eerie forest temple theme, or the little jingle that plays when you're opening a chest, it's all really good, and has given me a new kind of appreciation for Ocarina of Time because, yes, I am listening to these soundtracks while working on this video. The next and final OST we're talking about here, though, I needed no introduction to. Being up front real quick, for this iconic OST segment, I personally handpicked two to talk about, while the others I simply did research into. The first was Banjo-Kazooie's, and the second, Xenoblade Chronicles. Xenoblade is comparatively niche when put alongside the series and OSTs we've brought up so far, so in a way, it's understandable why it doesn't frequent the conversation of iconic video game soundtracks a lot, if at all, but I really think it deserves to. While I prefer XE2 and even XEX to the original Xenoblade, and even have general issues with the game itself, I have absolutely nothing against its soundtrack because it is extraordinary. And I won't lie to you and say I love all the music, not at all, but trust me when I say that Xenoblade's good pieces far outweigh its meh or even bad pieces, which are rare, very much so. I might get a little carried away here with naming off pieces, kind of like how I did with Undertale earlier, but bear with me here. I'll only name a few of my favourites so that you'll not hear all day. Right, so here we go. The main theme of the game, Prologue B, Everyday Life, Engage the Enemy, Unfinished Business, A Tragic Decision, Ricky's Kindness, and Thoughts Enshrined. Those are just a few of my favourites, but believe me when I say that Xenoblade Chronicles soundtrack is truly one that you will fall in love with fast, having played the game or not. And I believe in due time, both it and its soundtrack will be iconic. We're apparently not quite there yet, but hopefully soon. Remember in the prior segment at one point where I said me naming off specific pieces of said soundtracks would be redundant in the long run? Yeah, well, instead of talking about the full OSTs, we're talking about those specific pieces of iconic video game music. I'm going to be handling this segment a little differently because, being honest with you, even if I were to give just a one-sentence summary for each piece of music I have in my notes here, we'd be here a stupidly long time, and I'd probably start to sound samey after a few. So, instead what's going to happen is I'm going to play 10 seconds of each piece for you, all credited by name and who composed them. Truth be told, I'm doing this mostly because I simply can't do a lot of them justice with my writing, so I felt like this would be a better way to appreciate them, without taking up too much of your time. Sound good? Let's begin!
This was a triumph. I'm making a note here, huge success. It's hard to overstate my...
As the title of this segment suggests, I now want to talk about my favourite pieces of video game music. I did consider doing a mini top 10 for this bit, but I just couldn't whittle my favourites down into a top 10 again as I did back in 2019. Instead, I'm going to be listing off said pieces as a part of their series. So, for example, if we're going to be talking about Pokemon, which I will be, then I'll list off every piece of music in that series that I love, and not to be restricted in any way. However, the only restriction I've placed in this particular segment is that I can only mention music from games that I've played because that's only fair. You probably didn't need all that summary, but I thought it was best to be safe. So, without further stalling for time, let's begin. Starting with the Pokemon series, these are my favourites. Battle, Cynthia from Pokemon Diamond, Pearl and Platinum, Golden Run City from Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Pokemon Black and White's main theme, Decisive Battle, Wavering Emotions, Route 10, Battle End, and Enter the Power End by extension, all from Pokemon Black and White. Battle, Champion Iris from Pokemon Black and White 2, versus Xerneas and Yveltal, and Battle Champion Diantha from Pokemon X and Y, versus Primal Legendaries and Battle Zinnia from Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, versus Ultra Necrozma from Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, and finally, Battle Gym Leader from Pokemon Sword and Shield. On to Xenoblade now, and yeah, there's a lot here, surprise surprise. To begin with, the main theme, you will know our names, Unfinished Business, Valk Mountain Night, A Tragic Decision, the remastered DE version, Ricky's Kindness, Bionis' Awakening, and Xander's the Divine, all from the original Xenoblade Chronicles, with the exception of the remastered A Tragic Decision piece from the Definitive Edition. To continue, Mono X, Theme X, Primordia, Day, LNA, Day, LP, Uncontrollable, So Nah So Fern, Don't Worry, Via Flygon, and Your Voice, all from Xenoblade Chronicles X. And to continue on again with Xenoblade, this time with my favourite one, and #1 favourite game, Where We Used to Be, White All Around Us, Elysium in a Dream, Over the Sinful Entreaty, Loneliness, Walking With You, The Tomorrow With You, Drifting Soul, What Last You, Fonda Mima, Night, Spirit Crucible Elpis, You Will Recall Our Names, Those Who Stand Against Our Path, Deathmatch Returner, The Power of Jin, and Bringer of Chaos, all from Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Moving on to Animal Crossing now, 1 AM, 7 PM, Town Hall, and The Roost, all from Animal Crossing New Leaf. We're almost there, don't worry. Up next is A Hand Tile, one of my personal favourite soundtracks. In particular, my favourite pieces include the main theme, Welcome to Mafia Town, Timepiece Released, The Battle of Award 42, Subcon Forest, Your Contract Has Expired, Alpine Skyline, You Are All Bad Guys Phase 3, Goodbye Everyone, The End, Peace and Tranquility, and Rush Hour. And finally, a really short one in Helltaker. It's short because it only has 7 tracks, but they're all fantastic. So, Vitality, Apropos, Epitomize, Luminescent, Alchemy, and Titanium. Wow, damn, we've been here for quite a while, huh? Recording audio for this is definitely much longer than most of my other video essays and videos in general, so this will probably be a bitch to edit. I say probably, but no, it definitely will be. But anyway, yeah, here we are, at the end finally. I really wanted to just talk about as much as I possibly could here, because as I said at the beginning, I'm passionate about video game music, and being passionate about otherwise miscellaneous subjects like this is why the Wildcard series is a thing, and one of my favourites. Video game music has meant so much to so many different people through time, much like many of the games we've mentioned here in this video, and I'm no different. Video game music is music. I don't know why that's even a point of contention, but if you disagree, maybe you should reconsider. An open mind is the best kind, after all.